Let's talk about the history of DEI in the US. It's important to acknowledge that in the US there's been a history of racism, obviously. Even post the 13th Amendment, there were still Jim Crow laws that were restricting black people's rights. Now let's move to one of the first DEI-oriented initiatives. On February 12, 1946, a black World War II vet was forced out of a Greyhound bus by police officers. They proceeded to beat him and made him blind, basically. This led to President Truman signing Executive Orders 9980 and 9981. These executive orders were based on desegregating the federal workforce, including the military. This also laid the foundation for more DEI initiatives in the future. In 1954, there was Brown v. Board of Education. This immediately desegregated all schools. As a note, this was opposed by a lot of Southern Congress people. We then have the Civil Rights Act of 1964. This was basically the No More Racism Act. This outlawed segregation for businesses and government-maintained areas. This was heavily opposed by the Dixiecrats, a Southern-based conservative portion of the Democratic Party then. The Dixiecrats were very intentional about saying segregation was actually an important part of our culture. I think you start to see a trend here about conservative-based politicians. In 1973, we had Roe v. Wade, which basically legalized abortion. In 1978, it was ruled by the Supreme Court that affirmative action was allowable for colleges to use for admissions. I'm going to jump through a bunch of executive orders here. In 1990, there was the American with Disabilities Act. In 1998, there was Executive Order 13078. 2000, there was Executive Order 13171. In 2009, there was Executive Order 13518. In 2010, there was Executive Order 13548. In 2011, there was Executive Order 13583. In 2015, we had legalized gay marriage. It's important to note the historical context of consistently working on these DEI projects. I know that's a lot of words and numbers, but we have been working on this for a very long time. The basic premise here is that there's prejudice in our society. We have had this context for many years, and we need to work to make sure that this isn't a factor when we're hiring people or promoting people in our businesses or in our government. Even now, after all this work, it is proven that DEI isn't 100% successful. This graph shows that white and black people are overrepresented in our government based on our population, and it shows also an underrepresentation of Hispanic people. The bigger issue is with these senior executive level positions. You can see that white people are disproportionately put into these positions, and minorities are not put in these positions as equitably. So this is what DEI is working to solve. Having a disproportionate amount of white people in these supervisory roles is unreasonable, and this should be changed. Let's turn to Biden's DEI policies. In 2021, he signed Executive Order 13985. He wanted to pursue a more equity-based government. He signed a Domestic Policy Council to designate equity-based policies. And in February 2023, he signed Executive Order 14901. He mentions in this executive order the benefits of already having these programs enacted, and also the economic prosperity that this resulted in. He also mentions the economic benefit post-COVID of these DEI programs. And then as a response to seeing the positive outcomes of the DEI programs, he also reinforces equity-based positions. In the middle of these two executive orders, we saw Roe v. Wade being overturned in 2022. This was the first example of a DEI-oriented initiative being removed. And now in 2025, we have Trump demanding that DEI be removed from the government. He's labeling these systems as wasteful and radical. I showed you all this historical context because I wanted everyone to understand that these aren't like radical like yesterday, this is radical like 80 years ago. Not to mention just being inclusive, I don't think is wasteful. Judges have blocked this executive order, saying this is a blatant overreach of his power as president. This is unfortunately setting a precedent of removing freedoms that people should expect to have.